Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson, and this is my co-host,
Stephen White.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Jeff. So this is one of those topics that doesn't come from our blog. It doesn't come from anything I've read on the internet. This came straight from a situation that we're dealing with currently at RentPrep. And I thought it'd be just good to share with everybody on the podcast because it's something that we deal with a lot here. And it's a real weird situation. So just to kind of give you some backstory on it, we had a property management company that we work with, or a larger property management company, and a lot of property management companies come to us to turn their properties around. So, in other words, they're dealing with bad tenants. Because of the bad tenants, they have maybe a high turnover rate or a really high vacancy rate. They can't charge what they want to charge. So especially when you have, a new investor or a new landlord come in and, when he wants to turn things around, he wants to start to turn that property around. Well, you can't just kick everybody out and start from scratch. You have to have kind of a long-term plan in place. And so a lot of property management companies come to us and say, listen, here's our goal. We want to get a higher quality tenant so that a year from now we can raise the rates of the rent. We can, actually do some maintenance and some work to the properties and have them stick. They're not going to be damaged or destroyed. There's a lot of things that really the quality of the tenant's going to dictate what you can and can't do with that rental unit or the property. So they come to us with this long-term goal in mind that they want to turn the property over, get a higher quality tenant in. And of course, the best way to do that is through good screening and making sure that you're getting a higher quality tenant through the door. And as you're, not renewing leases, you're getting new people into those units that are of better quality. So the situation that we were dealing with specifically is a property management company that about a year ago set their standards. We helped them set their standards based on their market and based on what they were looking to do and what they were looking for. And so about a year later, we start to, really dig deep and analyze the numbers, and they've had good success to this point. And one of the concerns that they had was their decline rate was really pretty high.
So the decline rate being the number of people who applied that they turned down.
Yeah. And in this case, it was hovering right around the 40% mark. So 40% of the people that made it through the pre-screening aspect that they were getting background checks on didn't pass the background checks, and they could have failed for any one of three reasons. One would be their credit standards didn't meet the criteria. I think for this property specifically, they were looking at it, they needed a credit score of at least 620 or above. And I'm sure that there's deeper standards, but I'm just thinking of the score off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is evictions. They couldn't have any history of evictions in the past 7 years. The third thing was criminal records. They couldn't have any history of especially violent crimes and any recent criminal records within the past 3 years. Same with bankruptcies, needed to be reviewed sort of manually by the property manager. The manager could look at that as sort of a conditional acceptance and say, okay, this crime, something that we're willing to overlook, or, your bankruptcy was, 4 years ago or whatever, we're willing to look past that and still, offer you a tenancy. So based on that criteria, they were turning down just a lot of people. And so the issue came up of, is that a problem? And should they change their criteria to get that number dropped? And my first reaction was, what's your overall goal? What's the end goal that you're looking to achieve here? Because if you're looking to get a higher quality tenant, I think we're hitting the mark. I think we're doing what you wanted us to do. We're declining a lot of people because you're not getting a lot of people that are meeting your qualifications. but in return, what you're doing is the people that you are approving, that 60 some percent of people that you are approving, they're a much higher quality tenant. And I think the only time that it would become an issue is if you had some real major vacancy issues that you just had to fill the vacancies. I can understand that. But even in that case, something that we talk about a lot is, if you're having vacancy issues, I think that you need to look at your marketing and make sure, you're attracting a good, not only a number of people, but the right people.
Right.
So I think the problem goes deeper than just a number can tell you, here's a percentage of people that we're not accepting. I think before I would go ahead and start changing my screening parameters and say, well, maybe I'm setting these parameters too high, I'd first look at what type of people are we having apply and how are we attracting those people.
Yes. Well, the other piece, and you alluded to it a few seconds ago, is what impact is that really having on your business? First of all, what is your business? Your business is to rent out these properties to quality tenants who pay a reasonable rent. If you're accomplishing your basic business goal, then does it matter what percentage of applicants are approved or not approved? Certainly, the goal would be that everybody applies. 90% of the people who apply are qualified, and then all you're doing is picking from there to find which ones would be the best fit for you. But at the same time, ultimately, it doesn't matter. Now, is this property management company paying the fees for all of these background checks? So if they have to pay for twice as many because so many people are not qualifying, then that affects the bottom line. That's a business decision. But I think you brought up a couple good things. What are they really trying to accomplish by questioning this number? I think as if you're running a business and you see a number like that come up, I think that's a red flag that you need to stop and say, wait a minute, why do we have this number? Why is it as high as it is? And then what impact is it having on our business?
Right.
I tend to think it's not having an impact. I tend to think that they're accomplishing what they want to accomplish in that they're getting a higher level of tenant. But then you can start as a business person to say, wait a minute, am I getting a higher tenant, a higher quality of tenant? If they can look back at the tenants they had before, are they having higher late payments or lower late payments? Are they having uh, more people vacate the property? Go through all of those hard facts and
Hmm.
make comparisons to find out, are we in a better place than we were or in a worse place than we were?
That was my first response too, and I haven't received an answer yet. But my first reaction was, well, where are the eviction rates at right now
Hmm.
versus where they were a year ago? And that I think that's almost one analytic alone that can give you your answer. If your eviction rates are down, um, okay, so if your eviction rates are down, but your vacancy is up, I would much rather deal with a vacancy than an eviction. An eviction is going to cost you more in the long run than a vacancy. You don't want to sacrifice, you know, uh, you're sacrificing one thing for another, and I don't think it's worth the trade-off in that situation. I'd rather have a vacant property than fill it with somebody that is likely to be evicted from that. So that was my first question to them was, what are the eviction rates at now versus where they were at before we started this program a year ago.
Hmm. And there are a lot of different pieces to that because you could also start to track what are the costs to prepare a unit for rental.
Mhm.
Are those going up or down? Are these people leaving their properties in better shape than they were before? There are a lot of things that as you get a higher quality of tenant, there are a lot of things that affect the bottom line that I would think you're saving money on in the long run. But you have to think of all of the different impacts that a higher quality of tenant will have. Now, this doesn't mean that it's every time because you're attracting a higher quality of tenant they have to pass a higher level of screening that everything's going to be perfect and hunky-dory. But when you're talking about a multi-tenant property and you look at this over 10, 20, or 30 units, you can see those averages happen pretty quickly and you can see that things are trending better or trending worse or there hasn't really been much of a change. And then again, the question is, what impact does it have that 40 some percent are being rejected or declined?
Right.
Is that a material fact?
Yeah. And, you know, also, just to throw another a fact in there is that what was interesting is before we started working with them, they had taken the property over, and the previous management company had no screening process at all. So they were obviously asking for problems, and
Yes.
they were receiving problems. So they had all kinds of issues going, coming into it. So I got to imagine that the numbers are going to come back and show that they're on the right track. Like I said, I don't immediately my gut reaction is not immediately shoot, we're doing something wrong. It's I think we're doing something right. I think that we're on the right track. We're declining these people. These are people who could have potentially, especially before they were even running screening on them, they could have been in there.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got people with a high history of evictions, or people with really poor credit, or people with criminal records, and you're not doing anything to fix the problem that you had. So especially in a place that had problems and was known to have problems, I tend to think that you're going to deal with that higher number anyway. I mean, they
Yes.
don't, in that community, they may not know immediately that they're trying to turn that property around. So, they're going to get the same type of people applying, probably, that were applying before.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I look at it is, that's 40% less problem that you have.
That's right. And if you were going to look at changing your standards, again, if I was to do it from a business standpoint, I wouldn't just across the board say I'm going to, loosen my standards by 20% across the board. I would look at one particular area and say, okay, I've been requiring a minimum of a 620 credit score. I'm going to allow that to be 600 or something to that effect.
Mhm,
You don't say, okay, I'm going to allow a lower credit score, and I'm going to allow one bankruptcy, and I'm going to allow one eviction,
mhm,
where you're just bringing everything down. You can't quantify the change that you've made if you just do it across the board. Say, okay,
mhm,
I really think that it's okay if somebody has had a bankruptcy.
mhm.
As long as they meet these criteria within the bankruptcy, then we'll change that. So change one aspect of it and measure the results,
Yeah.
and then look at another aspect. But overall, I think these, even for a low income housing property, I think you're looking at pretty decent baseline requirements with a 620 credit score, no bankruptcies, no evictions, no criminal history. I mean, if you want to get into having problems in your property, start to change those, and you're going to see a big change quickly, and it's going to go the wrong way.
I agree. And I think that, Jeff, you and I have this entrepreneurial experience, and coming from an online business background, and any other landlords that sort of have that experience, we're sort of conditioned to always look at the numbers,
Yes,
and make, like you said, make a change, analyze that. How did that affect, what impact did that have, good or bad, and track everything that you can. And I think that's something that landlords, and especially property managers, like you mentioned, especially if you have multi units, you know, those averages start to change a lot faster than if you're dealing with one or two units. So um, you got to analyze those numbers. You have to be aware of them. You have to know what you're looking for and what numbers to break down, and make very educated, smart moves. And a lot of times, it's sort of that windage effect, where a small change, like we talked about changing just the 600 to or the 620 to the 600 on the credit score, that small of a change downwind may translate into a huge change down the road, and you won't know that until you have done it and analyzed it and can break it apart and say, okay, now what effect did that actually have on us? So
that's right.
definitely something that the tech world can sort of pass along to landlords, or the landlords can borrow from the tech world, is look at analytics, look at the numbers, analyze everything, and know what you're tracking.
Yes. And the other piece to that would be, I would even seriously consider going the opposite way. It's like, okay, I'm gonna keep everything the way it is as far as bankruptcies and evictions and criminal records, but I'm gonna raise it to 640 and see what impact that has. Even though you're thinking, wait a minute, I've got this 42%. That seems to be too high. Like, well, if I'm gonna make a change, I'm gonna make a change for the better. And so you have to take all things into account. What impact would you have if you raise that up to 640? And if I was going to do that, I'd probably look back at the applications I've have and see what difference that would make. What good tenants would changing it to 640? So the tenants that I have currently, if I change this to 640, which of those would that eliminate, and which of those are tenants that I really like to have? There are ways to analyze the data you have to make decisions as to what you should do in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that's one good thing about running the background checks is, the background check company is required to keep that information on record for 5 years. So that's a bank of information that you have, and a bank of data that you have access to for a long time, that you can
Yes.
always go back to and look at it and start playing what if, okay, well, what if I had changed this? Now let's look and see what that would have done. So, definitely good to have those records and be able to go back anytime.
Yeah, very much so. Well, great, Stephen. I think this was a fun topic, and it'll be fun and interesting to hear how this ends up after you sit down and talk with this company and get their thoughts and ideas, and how they take this information and apply it.
Yeah, I don't know how much money I'd bet on it, but I'd almost be willing to bet a whole lot that the eviction rates dropped, and I think that's going to be end of story. But maybe not. So yeah, we'll keep tracking this and see where it ends up. But my personal thought is they're on the right track.
Sounds good. I'll look forward to talking with you tomorrow evening.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.